It's your Friday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. So happy to be back with you for the final show of the week. Hope you're having a great day out there today. Good stuff coming up here. Bobby Nightengale Jr. from the Star Tribune joins me here in a few minutes to talk Twins. Big series against Texas, then another big one against Cleveland. They're kind of halfway through this big stretch where we wanted to see if they could kind of maintain or expand their lead. They've done okay so far, I would say. They're kind of holding serve. Missed a chance, though, to really put Cleveland away, and now Cleveland has added a bunch of players off of waivers from the Angels. Kind of an interesting development, but Bobby and I will get into a whole bunch of Twins things here in just a few minutes. A Vikings contract extension of note to get to at the end of the show as well. But who are we kidding? What did I miss? It's got to be the Gophers football team. 13-10 win at the gun over Nebraska. A clutch field goal wins it. So many big plays along the way that gets them to the finish line of a 1-0 start to the season. Now, the way I kind of wanted to talk about this game is in terms of narratives. And I was just kind of thinking about how, in this industry, we call the report on a game story. It's not just a game, not just a game write-up or a game roundup. It is a game story. There is a narrative that gets constructed about the game, about a game that happens, about a lot of different things in this, in the sports media world. But we call the main story off of a game the game story. And so it just kind of got me thinking about how that really is a narrative that we are constructing in the media. Those of us who are writing those things up after a game ends, taking in everything that that teams say, players say, post game, taking in all of what has happened, synthesizing a lot of it into, small bits and pieces, discarding a whole bunch of it that really didn't matter, and really focusing in on a handful of the most important things. That's kind of what you're taught to do across the board in writing. You don't zero in on the least important things, but it struck me thinking about that Gophers win over Nebraska, how the narrative of that game, how the story of that game changed so dramatically in so many ways by one single play, and that was Daniel Jackson's unbelievable catch that gave them the game-tying touchdown in the late in the fourth quarter that got them to 10-10 after they hadn't gotten a touchdown that entire game. That catch, I don't think I've ever seen a better catch. I'm not. Maybe I'm exaggerating because Justin Jefferson, that catch in Buffalo last year, maybe that tops it. I don't know if I've seen a better Gophers football catch, at least since I've been watching. The way he was able to, not just the catch itself, but the moment. It's a 4th and 10 play. There's about 2.5 minutes left. If he doesn't make that catch, the Gophers they have one timeout left, I think, because they've just called timeout to draw up that play. They've got one timeout left. If he doesn't make that catch, at best, they're going to get the ball back down a touchdown with about a minute left and no timeouts. This is basically the ball game. He takes the pass from Ethan Kaliakmanis. It's in the that kind of the side of the end zone. It's a nice pass, but it's kind of drifting towards the sideline. You guys probably all saw it, so I'm probably don't need to describe it so much. But just the way that Daniel Jackson was able to drag his lead foot, to keep his lead foot suspended, so he could drag his back foot to get it inbounds just barely. And come down with it, no questions asked, no bobble. Called a touchdown in the end zone, which I think was important. I think they would have gotten it even on an overturn because they did the review and said it was I think they called it confirmed. But what a catch. So he makes that catch, clutch moment, clutch play. If he doesn't make that catch, think about if he doesn't make that catch. Think about all that flowed from that catch. They get the extra point that ties the game. Nebraska gets the ball back. The Gophers intercept a pass, get the ball back around midfield with about a minute left, get down to the 29 or so, kick the game-winning field goal at the gun, win a game that they were losing a lot of that game, especially the second half, and it was close the whole way. They were more than a touchdown favorite going into this game for much of the week. They lose this game. Think about the narrative just in terms of the scope of their season. They've got a tough schedule up ahead. Think if they start 0-1 at home with a loss where they were favored by more than a touchdown, already a Big Ten loss. You're already thinking about the Big Ten West race is going to be a massive uphill climb if they didn't win that game. So that's point one of how the narrative changed. Point two, they threw the ball 44 times in this game. 44 times. If they don't make that connection at the end, if they lose 10-3, let's say, they lose 10-3, don't score a touchdown, only wind up with, 200 and some yards of total offense. Let's say that's how the game winds up. We are talking all today about how this new pass-first offense didn't look good, how Ethan Kaliakmanis, has got major growing pains, how the running game is a disaster right now. Instead, the running game is an afterthought. The running game is, hey, they'll get better at it, even though it wasn't very good in the opener Thursday. Kaliakmanis is getting all sorts of praise for clutch throws, for clutch plays, for the room to grow, things like that. So the narrative of their identity change would be completely different had they not won that game. And let's say the narrative for Nebraska would have been completely different too. We're talking about a Nebraska team that struggled so much under Scott Frost to win close games, to win close and late games. Well, if they had held on, they might be feeling different now. They might be feeling like their narrative was changing. Instead, it is an extension of that narrative. They are now 2-14 in one-score games since the start of the 2021 season. They are the anti-Kevin O'Connell Vikings. So just when I watch games sometimes, I can't help but be struck at how one play not only changed how we watched the game, but changed completely how the game would have been covered the next day. One toe drag by Daniel Jackson makes all the difference for the Gophers. And what a play. What an amazing game. A really intense game. I found myself really interested in watching it, especially in the second half. The defense was really good, forced 4 turnovers. That defensive backfield is going to be really good all season. It looks like they've got some pass rush this year as well. So if the offense can catch up to the defense, if the pass game can catch up to where they want it to be, I see some good things happening for this team potentially. Now, again, I wouldn't be thinking that. I wouldn't be saying those things right now. I would be saying, hey, it was a good defensive effort wasted if they had lost 10-3. I'd be saying, where do they go from here? Is this really the quarterback? Is this really the strategy for them? They would have to be patient in the face of that. Instead, they now have the ability to teach off of a win instead of a loss. And we are sitting here talking about one of the more stirring comebacks and one of the greatest plays that I've seen instead of a loss that was humbling. So think about that sometimes in the context of the moment, of the narrative. I'm doing it all the time. That's just kind of how I'm wired. But from that game in particular, that one play, one spectacular moment where he's able to keep his foot in just barely, fractions of an inch, split seconds. That's all it takes to completely change how we think about a game and a season to some degree.
MGM Wine and Spirits is the choice for savings, service, and a great selection of spirits, pre-mixed cocktails, wines, and of course, ice-cold beers and hard seltzers. With over 30 locations throughout the Twin Cities and beyond, there's an MGM near you. Head to MGMWineandSpirits.com to find a convenient location in your area. Get social. Follow MGM on Facebook and Instagram for all the latest news and trends. Make great moments with MGM Wine and Spirits, your locally owned and operated choice for over 50 years. Save time, save money. Shop MGM.
I'm glad to have Bobby Nightengale back on Daily Delivery. Covers the Twins, of course, joined our excellent Twins coverage team earlier this year. Bobby, it's been an interesting season. I think like the first 2 or 3 times we talked, this team was kind of in the same mode. They couldn't hit. The pitching was great. They couldn't really get much traction, in the division. And now I think things have changed. They've transformed a bit in the last, month or two. With the hitting's gotten better, you've got some injury intrigue. The pitching has been a little bit more up and down with some interesting moves there. Is that your takeaway too? That all of a sudden this team, there's way more different storylines now than they were maybe at the beginning of July.
Yeah, I feel like when I started, and maybe the first month of that, it always felt like the games were kind of the same, where they pitched really well, and it was whether they scored 3 runs, they'd win. If they didn't score 3 runs, they lost. Now I feel like it's more diverse. I mean, they're still pitching pretty well. The bullpen's had some recent issues, but I feel like that's kind of a season for every bullpen. You're going to have your 2-3 week flare ups. If you're a decent team, maybe a little bit longer if you're not a decent team. But the offense has turned around. I mean, you look at how the rookies have all contributed. Royce Lewis, Edward Julian, Matt Wallner's finally up full time. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why the offense has improved, but I think starting with those three is a huge one. So, yeah, I think that's probably the biggest change. It's just the rookies came in, they've contributed, and now you're getting some guys from the injured list back, and they're just fitting like Jorge Polanco, they're fitting those guys in, and they're playing well too.
Had a chance to not like officially win the AL Central over the last few days, but especially Wednesday when they had that late lead. Ends up being essentially a 2-game swing when they can't hold on to it with the Duran wild pitch and then the bad 10th inning sequence. They lose 5-2. Would have been a 7-game lead. Now it's 5. It still feels good relative to, I mean, we forget this team was a half game back at the All-Star break, so they've definitely reestablished command of the AL Central lead. That said, how do you think they felt coming off that? Like, Cleveland's not all the way gone. They kind of gave them some hope there that maybe they didn't want them to have.
Yeah, I think it was one of those, like Sonny Gray summed it up after the game, just saying we let one get away. Obviously, it would have been nice to have a 5-game lead with 28 to go. You're still in a commanding position. I think there's still some anxiety from Twins fans from last year, just knowing how the team played in September, that's in the back of their minds, and thinking Cleveland can always go on a run. But I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it was the biggest of series. 5-game, 7-game lead. Still both comfortable positions, but certainly, I mean, for all intents and purposes, if you have a 7-game lead with 28 to go, I mean, that's hard to go away. Cleveland will get another chance. Twins have another chance to put the division away next week when they play for 3 games in Cleveland. Twins take 2 of 3 there. They're kind of back in the same spot. So I'd say pressure's still on Cleveland. But it was one of those, when you're 1 strike away, 1 wild pitch, that's a tough way to lose, especially when it turns into a 2-game swing.
Now, Duran has been obviously their highest leverage reliever. He's maybe pitched into a little bit of tough luck at times here, but I went back and looked the last 2 months. His ERA is like 4.6. OPS against is like over 800. He's got a few blown saves, some losses. Like, he just hasn't been as dominant, not nearly as dominant as he was in the first few months of the year. Now, this is over a 2-month stretch. What should be the Twins' level of concern with maybe how he hasn't been that same dominant guy, at least outcome-wise, in the last couple of months?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those. It's his first full year as a closer, second season in the big leagues. I mean, some of this I think is to be expected. You can't be, I mean, kind of the expectation going in for the first few months of the season was you put Duran in, he's going to get the save, he's going to strike out 2 or 3 guys, he's not going to give up any hits. I mean, you look at the blown save against Cleveland on Wednesday, one of them was just a comebacker back to the mound, could have turned into an inning double play. He bobbled it, only got 1 out, and then the game time run scores on a wild pitch. I mean, to me, it wasn't like he got hit around. He's giving up a ton of homers. So, like, my concern level, I don't think, and the Twins too, I don't think it's super high. I think it's just one of those, there are growing pains when you're trusting a second-year pitcher as your closer, and you get into September and he's throwing more innings than he probably has in his entire career as a reliever. So it's just one of those. I think these happen with young guys, and there would have to be a little bit more for. I know the blown saves are concerning when you're trying to put away Cleveland, but I don't see it as the worst case scenario where he's getting hit around and his velocity's dropping and he doesn't look like the same guy. I think it's just the little things here and there.
Speaking of more innings than he's ever thrown, Bailey Ober reached, I think, like 140 innings or so between the Twins and the Saints because he started the year in AAA. They sent him down a few days ago. They option him and bring up Cody Funderburk, who had a really good debut, and he gives up the home run the other day. But the bigger piece of that was Ober. How I mean, he seemed like caught him off guard maybe a little bit, and just he's been such a rotation mainstay for 4 months that it caught me off guard as well. What do you think? What's the big picture plan for him? Is he going to be in St. Paul for a while? Do you think he comes up relatively soon once you can add a couple of roster spots here on September 1? What do you think they think is kind of the path forward for him?
Yeah, he'll be down for a little bit. He has to be down. If you send someone to the minor as a pitcher, they have to be down for 15 days. So he'll be down at least a couple weeks. I'm curious to see what kind of their plan is for a postseason role. I assume it's the bullpen, just for a guy who's thrown as many innings, and maybe he turns into a fourth starter if you advance past that first round where it's a best of three series. But I think it's just they're trying to find ways to limit his innings. I mean, it's one of those, all teams do different things to conserve their starting pitchers. Steven Strasburg, a few years ago, kind of made that famous when the Nationals were about to make the playoffs and they shut him down completely. And it was pretty controversial. So, I mean, they limited his last start to 4 innings, or they were going to have Dallas Keuchel piggyback after him for 4 or 5 innings. So they're already limiting him to pretty much 5 and done. Maybe it was going to turn into 4 and done. And now I think it's just, okay, let's take a couple of weeks off. And then when you come back, you could be a 6 inning guy again. And, maybe you don't have to watch it as closely. So part of it too, I mean, Dallas Keuchel's pitched pretty well. You have to find room for him somewhere. I don't think being a full-time reliever was kind of the role they wanted to give him. So at some point you kind of had to make a 6-man rotation work or find something to limit overs innings. So I think this was kind of their solution for that problem, was just saying, okay, let's let him throw as little as possible for a couple of weeks. And then the final weeks of the season, he can go back to normal.
Keuchel had that kind of really rough outing in Philadelphia, I believe, but every other appearance he's made has been either, somewhere between good and, almost perfect. That time he went into the 7th with the perfect game. How is he getting guys out? Like, I still don't understand how his stuff plays right now in this era where everybody's trying to lift the ball. Like, it just seems like an 88 mile per hour left-handed fastball should be getting knocked all around, but he's done a good job. How has that kind of changed kind of their thinking, and is his good pitching, is that sustainable for another month?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's sustainable. I mean, I think that's the big question, but I think the Twins are in a spot where why not test it out? And if it's not sustainable, I mean, you don't have to hesitate to make a move back to Ober or Louis Varland or whoever. You have options. So I think it's ride this as long as possible, see what happens. But, this is kind of who he's always been. I mean, he's never been a guy who's thrown 93, 94 miles an hour. It's always been a little harder than it is now, but he gets a lot of soft contact. Guys have trouble barreling him up. Now he's had some balls that have died at the warning track and probably given up more fly balls than he's used to. He used to be a guy who led the league in grounders every season. And he's probably given up more fly balls than he's wanted over his past few outings. But I think it's one of those. I mean, he's a guy who has World Series experience, veteran pitcher, highly motivated. I mean, he easily could have hung him up if he wanted it to when he struggled last year. So I think it's one of those that'd be great to have in a playoff team, especially another left-hander. You could have him pitch one time through the lineup in the playoffs. If everything went well. If it doesn't go well, then you have other options. So I think it's one of those, ride it out as much as possible, and you can always make decisions later.
Speaking of riding it out as much as possible, Byron Buxton's been out for about a month now. Just started rehab assignment in St. Paul. He played the outfield on Wednesday. It's just kind of interesting. Like, the offense really kind of took off, like found its form a little bit more when he got hurt, because suddenly, he wasn't hitting well. Suddenly you're, spreading around the DH role to a lot of guys who are hitting well, like Julian and other guys who can, who don't necessarily have to play the field every day, but you want their bat in the lineup. Michael A. Taylor's been really good in center field and has given you quite a bit of offense. I mean, he's kind of, for August, he kind of hit and played like you would want Buxton to hit and play in center field, with a lot of home runs, some good defense. Not saying they don't have room for a healthy, motivated, productive Byron Buxton on the roster, but I'm curious, like, what do you think they do when and if he is deemed ready to come back? What is his role? What does that look like if that comes to pass in September?
Yeah, in my head, I think it's probably 2 days a week in center field, somewhere around there, and then 3 or 4 days a week as your designated hitter with an off day in there. I mean, especially when Kirilloff comes back, I mean, that really crowds your infield. At some point, especially against right-handed pitching, you're going to have Polanco, Royce Lewis, and Edward Julian. One of those three has to sit if the DH isn't there and first base is not available. So I think that's where Byron Buxton playing center field, that's where you can get his bat in the lineup, especially against right-handed pitching. I don't know Michael Taylor's splits, but Being a right-handed hitter, I would assume, he's better against lefties than against righties. So that's one where Buxton could be an offensive upgrade. And it's just one of those. I think Buxton, he did hit before he got the hamstring strain. If you look at like his last week, I think he had like 6 doubles in a week. So I mean, if he turns into that guy, I mean that's huge for your offense. I mean, I know he's had a disappointing offensive season, but there's still a huge amount of upside what he can do for the rest of the offense if he's hitting. If you look at your defense. You look at like a late game playoff scenario. If you had Buxton, Michael Taylor, and Max Kepler as your outfield, that's as good of a defensive outfield as you could ask for. So I think there's roles there that he could fill, especially against left-handed pitching, where he could be the DH, and then against right-handed pitching plays more center field. And that would help the lineup and not kind of penalize any of the other guys that are hitting well right now.
Guys that are hitting well right now, there are a few of them, more than there were at a lot of other points in the season. One of them, obviously, is Royce Lewis. He had back-to-back grand slams. You can't do much better than that. First player in Twins history, if I'm not mistaken, right, that has done that in back-to-back games. He homered in the third game in a row after that. He's carried them to a certain degree. I mean, there's been other guys that are producing, but give me kind of your perspective on his emergence. I mean, we make these like grand statements, and I've even said it like, is this Royce Lewis's team now? Like, I don't know if we're ready to say that, but like leadership wise, and just like, when a guy helps you rally twice with grand slams, I'm sure that grabs some attention. How do you see his kind of evolving role, not just as a bat in the lineup, but more than that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's crazy to say he could become face of the team in the near future. I don't know if that'll happen this year. I mean, he's still a rookie. But I think that's something that a lot of people take for granted is he only has 50-some career games underneath his belt, dealt with so many injuries that he doesn't really have much time at AAA either. I mean, he lost a ton of at-bats in the upper minor leagues, doesn't have a ton of MLB experience. So the success he's having is, I know he was a number 1 pick, but there's not a lot of number 1 picks who could deal with what he's dealt with and still have the immediate impact he's having at the major league level. He's provided a huge boost. I mean, people see it. I mean, he's relentlessly positive. Always got a smile on his face. You see him when he rounds the bases on his homers, what that does for the dugout. So, no doubt, I think he's turned himself into an everyday player. I think when he first came up this year, there were some days where he was sitting a little bit. Not regularly sitting, but days where, okay, you can survive a game without him in the lineup. Now he's the guy who you have to have him in there every day. So, I mean, his role has increased. He's made himself more valuable. And he's a guy, I mean, when he comes up to the plate with runners on base right now, I think he's one of the more fearsome guys they have in their lineup. So I don't think I would say it's his team, but I would say that's not far off that it could be in the future. I mean, it's definitely shaping up where sky's the limit for him.
And you referenced Julian and Wallner, too. I mean, both those guys have had a pretty big impact. I mean, are we at the point now where we don't have to see Joey Gallo all that much, or where are we at with kind of the what's there? I guess maybe that's a way of saying right now, kind of even with guys rehabbing, with guys out right now, what's kind of their idealized lineup right now?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Gallo. I struggle to see kind of where he fits when you get some of these guys back. I mean, you get Alex Kirilloff back. That's a left-handed hitting first baseman. You get Willie Castro back. And Buxton. You don't have it. Gallows needs to be the backup center fielder's gone. Castro's kind of he's a switch hitter, so he can hit lefty. And you saw Joey Gallo got pinch hit for by Jordan Leplow yesterday. So I think that's kind of says a lot about his role, is that he's getting pinch hit for by right-handed hitters against right-handed pitching. So, I mean, he could be the odd man out when, you're going to have expanded rosters, and that'll allow you to add an extra position player. But Kirilloff, Buxton, Willie Castro back, I mean, you start looking at the numbers, that's where he's in trouble. I think the Twins are well positioned, especially against right-handed pitching in terms of their depth. Kirilloff, I feel like, has kind of become the forgotten man. He was hitting really well before he got hurt. And if he can kind of find that form again, shoulder injuries are always tricky, I think. But if he can find that form again, that'll do huge things for the offense. But like Matt Wallner, he's got to start against right-handed hitters. Max Kepler's kind of turned into a guy. I don't know if you can sit Kepler now. I mean, he's hitting well against lefties now, too. So I think your outfield's pretty set. Your infield's already crowded. So there's going to be some guys that are kind of squeezed out of every playing time, and I think Joey Gallo is going to be one of them. And then you have the guys like Donovan Solano and Kyle Farmer. They'll probably pick their spots for those guys, but I think the depth's a good thing when you talk about getting into playoff specific scenarios late in games. You want to have guys off the bench you feel comfortable with, and I think that'll be the case as long as everyone stays healthy.
Kepler's an interesting one because, everybody was on him. He was hitting below 200. His OPS was like 650. Everybody was like, what do you guys see in him? Just let him go. He's probably not going to be here next year. At least that was the prevailing thinking before, because he's got the team option and the small buyout. Do we know how do we know, like, was there something that changed in him, or did he just he started finding some success and built on that? Like, how did Max Kepler turn into, like you said, a guy that you don't think you can sit him against anybody? Whereas, 2 months ago, everybody's like, get rid of this guy. He's terrible.
Yeah, I mean, I think a part of it was he got onto a roll and then he just kind of held on to it, was struggling, those first couple months, came back from the injury, really struggled when he got back from the injury, and then kind of found a rhythm after that. When you ask him, I mean, he's talked about the team a little bit, saying he feels like the team's less individualized. Guys are cheering more for each other, and he's kind of fed off of that. He swears there's no like big swing change. There hasn't been, any sit down with the hitting coach and change his approach or anything like that. And if you looked when he was struggling, I mean, he was still hitting the ball hard. It was just at a lot of guys, and he was probably striking out more then than he is now. But I mean, you just kind of look at the turnaround. I mean, that's the perk of having people who believe in you for a 162 game season. He was struggling for a couple months, but the whole offense was struggling, and that probably bought him some time and got the attention off him a little bit. And then as you see him now, I mean, when he's hitting the way he is, I mean, I think like next year's team option, that's kind of turning into a no-brainer. In the other way, that you got to keep him if he's playing the defense he is and hitting the way he is.
Yeah, 940 OPS since June 20th, 14 homers, batting almost 300, getting on base at a decent clip, walking just enough. Strikeouts down. He's probably striking out about once every 5 plate appearances during that stretch, which is, if this was 1980, everybody would be complaining about him striking out once every 5 times, but this is 2023, and that's actually pretty good, especially on this team. It's just he hadn't been great since probably 2019, and he's been great for 2.5 months. It's just that kind of came out of nowhere to me, at least.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, I mean, obviously I haven't been around the team the past couple of years. I remember 2019 when he had the great numbers that he had, and kind of didn't realize how much he struggled after that. But you take away the shift, I think a lot of people pointed to him being a guy that was going to benefit from that. I don't know how many extra hits he's gotten because you don't have the roving infielder that's sitting in shallow right field and kind of dominated against left-handed hitters. So, but I don't know how many extra hits he got, but you just kind of see the confidence for him. He's using kind of even more of the field too. You see him going opposite way for some singles, a little bit left of the center fielder. So I think that's a good sign for his swing, just in terms of he's feeling good enough that he can go opposite way. When he's pulling the ball, he's getting rewarded for it. So, I mean, he's been huge for the Twins. I mean, I feel like there's been a lot of talk about how much the rookies have helped. Max Kepler's helped a lot too.
Couple more things for you, Bobby. One, I haven't really thought much about or talked much about pace of play, pitch clock, for a while now. It kind of feels like it's become just kind of part of the norm. How do you feel? Do players still talk about it a lot? Are there still issues, or has this become, kind of smoothed out now that we're kind of 5 months into it?
Yeah, I think this is kind of the new normal. It almost feels weird when you're watching a three-hour game that's almost turned into like the old 4-hour game where it's like, wow, this game is really dragging on. And then you look and it's only 2 hours and 50-minute game. So I know the players, they haven't brought it up a ton. I'll be interested to see kind of the first pitch clock violations in the postseason, how pitchers react to that. But a lot of players talk about the benefit of saying, I think it's 30 minutes that have been cut from the average game. So you're talking about an hour off your feet every two games per a week. You're basically off your feet for an entire game. So you're playing, almost a game less a week, just in totality in terms of the pitch clock. So I think that's been the biggest benefit for a lot of players. They say they feel a lot fresher this deep into the season than they usually would, just because they're not on the field as long and games are shorter.
Final thing, let's assume the Twins are going to win the AL Central. Again, that's not a given right now. 5 up with 28 to play. They got to feel good, but there's still work to do. But let's assume that they do this. Do you have like a team that you feel like they match up well with? Have you looked far enough ahead to the playoffs? Like right now, it looks like they would play Texas if the playoffs started today, but that's still subjective to change. You could be Toronto, could be any number of teams if they rise and fall. Do you feel like they match up favorably with any one team? And how do you feel they match up just in general in a 3-game series?
I mean, a 3-game series, I think you have to feel good at least about the Twins pitching. Pablo Lopez, Sonny Gray. I'm sure those two are your top 2 starters. Yeah. Game 1, game 2, however you want to put them. But you have to feel good about the way they're pitching. I'll be curious how they design their bullpen. I mean, right now you have basically 4 relievers, Duran, Jax, Thielbar, and Pagan that are getting the majority of the high leverage situations. You're probably going to add to that. I mean, Keuchel could be a guy, Hunter Maeda could be a guy, Louis Varland could be a guy. Chris Paddock is trying to work his way back to become one of those guys. So I think you're going to have some converted starters that are going to be added to that group. Pitching wise, I think you feel okay. The offense, they've shown they've been better in the second half, performed when they've been behind, which is, I think, a good, battle tested thing. As far as like best matchups, I would think like Seattle would be a better matchup than Texas. Texas, one, they have some left-handed pitchers they could go to, which has been over the course of the season, that's been the Twins' primary weakness offensively. And they have guys like Jordan Montgomery. You'd have Max Scherzer where you'd have to face him. Texas's lineup has been really good. Now Texas has struggled. Their bullpen has been terrible this year, but I don't know if you'd want to, base your playoff hopes on Aroldis Chapman struggling or Will Smith
right.
struggling, guys who won World Series before. So I think that would be the better matchup. Houston, those are a lot of winners. I feel like it's going to end up being an AL West, whatever team finishes third there.
Yeah.
Otherwise, maybe Toronto. Either way, I mean, all the games are at Target Field. Twins might be considered the underdog based off their record, but with their pitching, I'd be surprised if they got swept at home. I think that'd be a terribly disappointing season, terribly disappointing way to go out with the team they have built.
I think that's true, and I think people are watching that carefully. Of course, you have not been here for any of the 18 consecutive playoff losses, but I'm sure you've heard plenty about it as well, and this organization knows it. They wear that right now, and they are very eager to see that eradicated. But they got to get there first. We'll see if they can do it. Bobby Nightengale, appreciate the time as always. We'll catch you soon.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Really impressed with Bobby's command of this beat already. Just joined us a few months ago, coming from Cincinnati. But I really enjoyed that conversation with him, and just this Cleveland. Fascinating stuff from Cleveland lately, where they added 3 Angels pitchers that were placed on waivers. Angels, I don't know what the Angels are doing, but they tried to go for it at the deadline, didn't work out. Some of the guys they got, Lucas Giolito and Reynaldo Lopez from the White Sox, they traded prospects for these guys. They just dumped them on waivers to try to dump some salary. The Guardians got Giolito, Reynaldo Lopez, and Matt Moore, 3 pitchers to add to their September pitching staff. That gives them a boost. I still, Twins are still up 5 with 28 to go. But talk to me next week when these 2 series, the one against Texas and the one against Cleveland, are done. These are 2 road series. The Twins caught Texas at a good time the other week when they were still struggling. Got them 3 out of 4. Just gave away that game Wednesday to the Guardians. They let the Guardians kind of back into the race. Let's talk a week from now and see where they are, because I'm still a little bit nervous about this stretch and seeing where they're going to wind up, especially now that Cleveland has added 3 major league caliber arms that could help them down the stretch here. Speaking of down the stretch, let's finish with the cooler. TJ Hockenson signs a 4-year extension with the Vikings, could make him the highest paid tight end. Not the highest paid player. That would be something else if that was a tight end. The highest paid tight end in the NFL with an average value contract of a little more than $17 million. Hopefully that clears up any lingering issues he's been having. We were kind of Wink, wink, nod, nod, looking at his ear infection, his back injury, wondering if that was contract related. The contract is settled now. Hopefully they will have him a full go when the season starts a little over a week from now, because he is going to be a big part of the offense. And when you look at what they can do with Justin Jefferson, TJ Hockenson, Jordan Addison, and KJ Osborne, that is a lot in the receiving game for Kirk Cousins to work with. Could put up a big season, could be in line for a contract next year, whether that's here or somewhere else. So a big piece of the puzzle for the Vikings. The biggest one obviously remains a Justin Jefferson extension. Imagining that's still just a question of when, but until it's done, I think Vikings fans will be like, well, when's it going to get done? Let's get this thing done. But they at least got the Hockenson one done before the season started. That will do it for me today. Good stuff coming up next week. And if you're out at the fair, come find me on Saturday. I think at 3 o'clock, I'll be there with folks from the Minnesota Lynx. And then Monday morning, I should be out there around 11 o'clock or so with Don Plitzawhite, head coach of the Gophers women's basketball team. So look for me out there. And until then, enjoy the rest of your long weekend. No show on Monday, but I'll be back at it again Tuesday with Royce. Talk to you then.